In this episode, we venture into the Cyberpunk era when I have a chat with the writer and creator of the Rubble and Ruins game, and I talk about podcast length and the future. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 28, Mutated Rats and Cyberpunk Scenarios. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host, Inwils, and welcome to September. Now, I've noticed recently that the overall length of the podcast is getting longer and longer. This is mainly due to the fantastic people who are agreeing to come and have a chat with me. I feel that these chats provide so much insight and content that I never want to delete any of the discussion. I have in some cases split the chat over 2 episodes, and although this makes life easier for me, less work to do for the next month's episode, I do realise that it might put some listeners off. I guess if you're not interested in part 1 of the discussion, then you might not come back for part 2. If you look at the data relating to effective podcasts, it says that the optimal length is between 30 and 40 minutes. Well, I've never been one to fit into the optimal or even normal range of things, so I'm going to maintain some variation. However, in order to reduce the overall length, I'm going to be a little bit more selective about the content I personally provide for the episode. Rather than talking about me and my gaming group in every episode, I'll keep these discussions for when I don't have anyone to chat to for the episode. Bet you're all looking forward to those now, aren't ya? I'm going to call it Me and My Group. Definitely not one to be missed. Do, however, remember that if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message me on the various forums I frequent. Segments can be short or you can have a longer chat with me. I'm always looking for reviews, opinions or interviews with people. So if you are interested, then chat to me on the forums or send me an email to inwils@gmail.com. One setting that I've always wanted to explore further is the Cyberpunk era. I used to run a Shadowrun 5th edition campaign every Tuesday evening, but the players sadly drifted away and it stopped. With Shadowrun 6th edition not getting a very good review at all, I'd put my search for a Cyberpunk setting to one side for the time being. However, not so long ago, I received an email about a Cyberpunk setting which was based on the Mythras imperative rules and published through the Mythras Gateway. As you can imagine, I immediately grabbed the person, not literally you understand, who created the setting and got them booked in for a chat. So, keen to find out about Rubble and Ruin, I synced my calendars with Rich and arranged to have a chat. Over to you, Rich.
Well, hello, my name is Rich Leduc, and I am the author of Rubble and Ruin, which is a new Mythras Gateway setting, a book.
Fantastic.
Complete book. And in my day job, I'm a research scientist at a major Midwestern university. I work in translational medicine and bioinformatics, particularly in proteomics. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you today and to tell you about what I've done with Rubble and Ruin, which is kind of a passion project. It's something that I was motivated to do. I have a rather unique setting that I have been running now for about 40 years.
Fantastic.
And over time, I've developed this thing, and it is very interesting. It's interesting to me. I'm fascinated by it, and many people who play it really like it. And so, what I'd like to do today is just talk about Rubble and Ruin.
Yeah, and I must admit, I've had a sneak preview of it, and I was very excited to have this chat with you today, because I think it's a very unique setting and some fantastic new rules or new aspects in there. So what's your experience with role-playing games and Mythras? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I started gaming in the mid 1970s, and I grew up in Northern California, about 300 miles, 400 plus kilometers north of the Bay Area. And if you know Chaosium, of course, gave us RuneQuest, and they were out of Alameda, out of the Bay Area. And so I grabbed it as a prop. I'm going to show it to you and Willis, but the listeners will just have to trust me. This is my original RuneQuest.
Wow.
Staple bound. So
fantastic.
This has to, the cover is long gone, but it's before they started binding these things. And I bought it at a shop when I was a kid, and all my buddies and I played RuneQuest from not exactly day one. We were in what they now call OD&D. We called it Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, but the brown box. And so I've been playing RuneQuest rules and what is now Mythras rules for very, very long time. And the other thing I did in the early 1980s, I was, a science nerd kid and was interested in science, and I played Aftermath. And Aftermath was this very open post-apocalyptic role-playing game where each individual GM could create their own post-apocalyptic world and their own vision. And I had this one that kind of developed side by side as the rest of the world was developing what we now call canon fantasy, or what Rob calls classic fantasy, that world of elves and dwarves and whatnot. And I had that same vibe, but in a post-apocalyptic setting.
Very nice.
And so you have a group of adventurers who meet, and they go into the holes in the ground in the rubble. And instead of using magic, they would use science and technology. But you had the same style of play. And so over time, I kind of got Aftermath as a very complex game, and I got out of that and into, we called it RuneQuest, but it's now more properly known as basic role playing. And so I developed this Rubble and Ruin world and concept and system. And about 10 years ago, maybe a little more now, I did a monograph with Chaosium under their monograph system of Rubble and Ruin. And recently I've done a lot of work. It's very, a lot of improvements over that original monograph. And so I've put it together and put it out on drive-through as got under the gateway license for Mythras, which is a one. I stumbled into Mythras backwards. It's like, well, these guys are doing things the way I like it, rather than in BRP.
Exactly.
Who are these people? Oh, Mythras. I like the Mythras form. And that's how I became a Mythras guy.
And I often say it on this podcast, I really like that aspect of Mythras, that there's this core set of rules that can be adapted so easily for a wealth of settings. Obviously, playing Aftermath, have you always been interested in this post-apocalyptic setting? Has that always been a passion?
Yes, I would say it has, both literature and role-playing games. But I'm not. There's a lot of variation in the post-apocalyptic genre, and so a lot of people are very interested in the minute details of firearms. I will put it that way. That is not me. And there are people that are very interested in the minute details of wilderness survival and things like that. That's not me. I've always been more interested in telling fantasy stories without magic.
Right.
And so what I do is I run the world forward into a cyberpunk kind of world. So imagine somewhere in the future, in the canon Rubble and Ruin right now, it's in 2065. And we've got sort of a cyberpunk culture with cyborgs and a lot of genetic engineering. Nice. And then I postulate some global wars and stuff to get me to a place where we're 20 years after that.
Yeah.
And I have a little warning on the back of the book that it is a very contrived future history to get us to the place that allows us to have a fantasy setting without with using science and technology.
And I think that's really good, because I think sometimes, I mean, I'm a great lore lover and I love lore, but sometimes I don't really want it to be completely and perfectly defined, because I want to be able to adapt it and sort of like change things as I go along. So Rubble and Ruin, it's, just to be clear, it's a standalone system, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So under the Mythras Gateway, just for people who don't follow the details, there's the Mythras imperative rules. And if you get the blessing from Design Mechanism, you can take those rules, incorporate them into your setting. And so anyone who plays Mythras will have absolutely no problem understanding, in my humble opinion, have no problem understanding the rules. But it is not, a lot of the great details in Mythras are not in the Mythras imperative. So like everybody gets 2 action points. And that's now, if you were playing your Rubble and Ruin game and you took and used dexterity to find the number of action points, I don't think that the Design Mechanism police would knock on your door. But it's not in the rules that I have included.
And it's interesting because M Space has that same number of actions. You everybody just gets 2 actions, and it's really interesting the contrast of my players from Mythras to M Space, because some of them are used to having 3. You know, and they're sort of like thinking, oh, I can't do anything else now. But the people like Mr. Pickles, who plays Bartleby, only ever has 2. And he's sort of like, well, now you know what it feels like, guys. You know, this is
welcome to my world.
Yeah, exactly. This is the other side of the coin. So it obviously has a very strong cyberpunk influence and feel about it. How much technology and sci-fi is actually in it?
As much as I could cram.
Right.
So what I did, so first of all, I want to say I love Mythras and I love spellcasters in Mythras.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I've been playing all the various flavors of the D100 system forever. And I really like the idea that you've got 2 skills. One of them determines how much you can do, and one of them determines what you can, how well you can do it.
Yeah.
And so when I have, for example, I say I've got, instead of wizards, sages, and healers, we have engineers, scientists, and physicians.
Yeah.
And each of these are structured like similar, by analogy similar to the Mythras spellcasters.
Right.
And so an engineer, for example, has design and build as two separate skills.
Yeah.
And the higher your design, the more specialties you have, the more things you can design. So, for example, you might take, if you were running an engineer, you might take mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer engineering. Whereas somebody else might take structural engineering, mechanical engineering, and something else.
Yeah.
And then the build skill is how good you are at actually building the things you know how to do. So it's similar to evocation, is how good you are at casting those spells that you know. But the other skill is controlling how many spells you know. So it's that same model.
And that's really good. I really like that aspect of it.
Yeah. And then the other thing I did is technology becomes a standard skill. And it is analogous to folk magic. In Mythras, folk magic, anybody who knows folk magic, every 10% you have in folk magic, you get one of these neat little spells.
Yeah.
And they're great. And I love them. and I want to play more Mythras, and I want to play folk magic, folk wizards. But so in Rubble and Ruin, because it's a standard skill, everyone knows a little bit of technology. Because it's standard skill, it's 2 attributes added together. You're going to have, on average, 20 to 30% in it, which means you're going to have 2 to 3 specialties, even if you're not a technology focused character. I'm a big fighter. I use guns and stuff. But I still have armory, hand loading, and gunsmith as my 3 basic technologies I know how to do.
That's really good. I really like that. And it's interesting. In our Mythras campaign, we do have folk magic, but it's tailored to the casters. So theists are there like minor prayers, and sorcerers, they're like cantrips, so I really like that crossover and how you've linked it together, to almost like match. It matches the magic system really well. And the idea is hopefully somebody who plays Mythras can sit down with Rubble and Ruin and say, I get this. Yeah. But now I'm going to be focusing on science and technology rather than on magic. Yeah. Which I think there's merit to occasionally playing games that are based on real things. Yeah, very much so. And I really like that aspect that it's a standard skill, so all characters have it. So you're not sort of like ever having to role play that you don't know anything. It's a standard skill, you have it, which really reflects the world in which the characters are developing. What about one of the things that you popped down in the interview notes, the chat notes, was about genetic possibilities? And you mentioned transhumans, uplifts, and tags. Tell me more about that. Okay. So in my day job, I work a lot with translational medicine, genomics, proteomics. Actually, my specialty is proteomics, but I'm used to manage a national scale genomics facility. And so I've thought about this, and one of the things, so Cyberpunk is a great aesthetic. It's a great thing. It's fun. Great way to play stealth stories, but it's kind of locked in the science of the 1980s. And, we're in 2020s now, and the Human Genome Project is behind us, and we're moving forward, and people aren't, I don't think there's enough conversation going on about the things that we'll be able to do in the near future to living systems. We're already doing it. The COVID, the Moderna, these RNA vaccines are just like, when I was first reading about it, I'm like,
oh, they got that into practice. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And so in Rubble and Ruin, I've always had these different, I'm calling them biotypes because I'm too much of an academic to call them races or species, because they're not.
Yes.
And I'm too much of a word guy. I can't bring myself to, so I had to make up a term, because robots are obviously not a species. So there are robot player characters. I am getting to your answer, but I also an academic.
That's all right.
Getting the long way around. And wild type humans are clearly a species.
Yeah.
But then one thing that others have talked about long before me are uplifts, which is the idea that you take an animal and you modify genome of the animal such that it expresses something more close to a human. And so in Rubble and Ruin, I have 2 canonical uplifts. I have dogs for these barkers, which are very much like a certain sci-fi role-playing game recently republished by Mongoose.
Yeah.
Varger.
Yeah.
And then I have the Emble rats, which are actually very similar to an encounterable group or species from Aftermath, which are these 3 foot tall. They're kind of like hobbits with mechanical fetish. So they're really good with machines. Yeah. And in my case, they're not to be thought of as random mutations. So one of the things about the word mutant is we tend to think of a mutant. Many people in science fiction think of mutants as random mutants.
Yeah.
My world is full of mutants, and none of them are random. They are all engineered mutants. And so these Emble rats were engineered during the global wars to meet certain needs. So they are an uplift. Transhumans, in my usage, is where you take human genetic material and you improve it. So but improve has to be air quoted. So anybody listening, put some air quotes around improve. Improve is whoever's doing the engineering makes it how they think it would be better, how they think this individual would be better. So obvious examples, people are working on in real world is knocking out deleterious genes that are causing genetic disorders, or adding genes. But you can imagine in a sort of a Gattaca type, if you saw the movie Gattaca, this idea of making better people, better, again, air quoted. And then the last one is something of my own invention, and the tags. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this before, and I'm not sure why, but maybe it's just too weird and I'm the only guy who would think of it. But tags are transgenic anthropomorphic genomes. Is what it's just a word I made up.
Tags.
Yeah, TAG, right? Tags. But the idea is, let's say you took a mouse. Now, a mouse has no human rights. Yeah. In our world, it's a mouse. I can set a trap and kill a mouse in my garage. I don't. I live trap them.
Yeah. Good.
But I could.
Yeah.
And let's say you took a mouse and you modified. The mouse shares a high degree of genetic similarity with humans. Bananas share a 55% genetic similarity.
Wow.
So you take something simple like a mouse and you modify in the embryo or in the egg. You modify every gene that is unique to mouse. You knock it out. You take it away. And every gene that is homologous to a human, but a little bit different. There are all these silent mutations and things. Yeah. I could go into a genetics lesson, but I won't. You leave it there. And for every gene that is unique to human, but not in mouse, you make a copy that is in no way, using the redundancy of the human genetic code, you make a copy that is in no way related to human. And you put it in there. And then you have to understand gene expression well enough to control that. There's probably some histone code issues that we could talk about. But, we won't, because Mythras Matters and not speculative genetics. But you do all this and you express this and you grow this organism up. Well, what it's going to do, it's going to develop as a human, because you have made something that is genetically human, but it has no background to human.
Right.
It's mouse and synthetic.
Yeah.
So what is that organism? And so because Rubble and Ruin postulates a very unpleasant future where things are not as well as we hope they will be in our world, you could imagine people making these things, and then it's like, well, it's a mouse. It has all the rights of a mouse. Yeah. That individual. And so these become, well, of course, in Rubble and Ruin, it's 20 years after the fall of civilization. So they're all free and fending for themselves. But those are the three broad categories of genetically altered organisms. And then to tie it in back to gaming, Rich, stop talking about genetics, talk about so to tie it back into gaming, another thing that I like that I have done in Rubble and Ruin that others may want to just grab is, because there's no magic, I use power to govern how many neat things your character starts with. And so these mutants can start with mutant powers. I have these enhancement lists, and so tags can buy, night vision and various other enhancements. Whereas wild type normal people would buy with their enhancements increased skills or increased starting gear. And then robots or cyborgs are the best example. Then cyborgs get more, mechanical arms and mechanical head, eyes and stuff.
Exactly. And I really like that aspect of that. Because a lot of the time we see power as something like a very humanistic quality, but I really like this idea that, the cyborgs can have this high power. And so they have these cybernetics, which are these enhancements that are actually reflects that really well. And I think there's flaws as well. Did I see something in there?
Yes, there are, because I'm just a sucker for those. I have a strong background in GURPS, and post-apocalyptic games, you need flawed characters.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah.
It just, it adds so much flavor. And so, but you want to control it. And so what I do is I allow, enhancements, a character with an awful lot of enhancements might have 8 points of enhancements.
Yeah.
Most characters might have 3 or 4 points of enhancements, and enhancements can be 1 or 2 points. And flaws, you can either take 0 flaws, I don't have any. You could take a 1-point flaw or a 2-point flaw, and those give you that many more points for your enhancements.
Yeah.
So it's nice. It gives you some care. It helps flesh out the character, helps give you, some uniqueness, but at the same time, it's not overpowering.
Yeah. And I'm a great believer of if I ever get to play, which is very rare, I love that aspect of characters, not the fact that I have a weakness or a flaw. It's the fact that I have to role play and manage that, so I have to be aware of it when I'm actually role playing, to make sure that I'm sometimes maybe one step ahead of the GM and started to say, but hang on a minute, or role play out, rather than it just becoming a throwaway. I think it has to have substance. And contribute to the role playing and to the game and to the setting, rather than just being something, I dislike tomatoes, so, that never has an impact, but I gain an extra point, so that's really, I really like the world. Well, one thing that I was a great Shadowrun fan and still am, but what about things like computers and vehicles? Is that all in Rubble and Ruin as well, or not?
Well, let's I'm going to go back to my air quotes. All. Yeah. So I have so there for computers, I'm very comfortable with how I have with the rules I have. They work very well for small, a post-apocalyptic setting, small computer setups. I used to manage a national scale compute cluster, and that probably would break down in my rules. So it's not like, oh, we'll use the system over there. But for, post-apocalyptic setting, the computers are pretty well handled. Vehicles, I have rules for building vehicles, but you're going to have to pull, if you want to do a lot of, Mad Max high-speed chases, you're going to want to pull those mechanics from some other Mythras product.
Yeah, I think Mythras Companion actually has them in.
I'm being coy here because, of course, I'm not licensed to.
I just say anything.
But yeah, so I didn't. We've got all the mechanics for building cars. Most of the base, style of play that I run. People will build a pickup truck and use it to haul loot from the place of adventure to where they live, that sort of thing. So we're not, and then I did introduce a couple of individual aircraft. So if you watch YouTube, people are starting to build these things and they're awesome. They're building little like drones, like octocopters that you can sit on.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I don't know what the future of those holds, but in my world, by gosh, people are flying around in them with crossbows.
Yeah, fantastic.
And then some lighter than air, rigid body airships, so that you can kind of have these guys float around in balloons and these guys are in octocopters and they fly around. And, imagine skyscrapers and, remnants of old skyscrapers and people up in the top with their octocopters flying around. And
yeah, it sounds brilliant. It really does. What I'm really interested in drones, because I really would be a rigger in Shadowrun terms, and I know M Space brought out drones in a companion. Do we have drones? Can we?
We do have drones, and so there's, you need an engineer to build them. Yeah. There are some little so one of the things I called the engineers, scientists, and physicians are collectively technologists.
Yeah.
Right. They're spellcasters, but they're not spells. So they're technologists. And every technologist gets a handheld computer. They start the game with it and they get it as a free specialty in technology. And it is basically our cell phone.
Yeah.
So imagine a cell phone without cell coverage and you've got a handheld, but also imagine that we've got another 50 years of development on these. So I don't even pretend to try and keep track of file size, how much data do you have. You can cram as much on that thing as you want.
Yeah.
And the real problem is getting to it and organizing it. But one of the things, to answer the drone question, once you build the drone, you control it through your handheld. So anybody who has, even if I'm not an engineer as a player character, my character is not an engineer, he's a fighter.
Yeah.
But I could, because technology is a standard skill, I can take informatician, start with the handheld, and then I can use drones. Nice. And they become, in a sense, clairvoyance spells, right? It's what's around the corner. I think there might be danger over there. I'm going to send the drone. Now, there's a certain market value to those things. Yeah. So you don't want to just send them willy-nilly, Oh, let's send them everywhere. Oh, look, those people are shooting them down and I'm losing them. But so there's this balance of when do I send my drone? When do I sneak up and look?
I really like that connection, that analogy back towards the spells as well, in the sense that this is a clairvoyant spell, which is basically your surveillance drone going around the corner and having a look. And I think one of the things that we were chatting about beforehand, and I picked up from the rule system, and you were just hinting at it then when you're saying, that they do cost money, is that it's the scarcity of things in the world. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, because it's so the mechanics work when there's a scarcity. So in Rubble and Ruin as presented, there's no money. There's no one thing that, and they don't all take bottle caps. But instead there's trading. So there's a simple set of mechanics for handling trading, and things have trade points, which are based off their utility, not how hard they are to make. So an old calculator might, a cell phone would be very difficult to make. Yeah. But it's only moderately useful. They're worth like 25 trade points.
Got you.
And so there's an inherent scarcity in the gameplay where you're trying to find things, and ideally the characters are trying to do something that's the plot of the game, and they need to get the stuff to do it. And so we want to move the village from here to there. We need to get a bus. So we have to find a bus chassis. There are mechanics for how many, units of auto parts do you need for the mechanical engineer to repair the bus. Then we've got a bus. Now we need fuel, blah, blah, blah. Now we accomplish the task. And in true rambling style, I forget if I've answered your question.
No, you have, very much so. And I think you've also hinted very well to the general feel and the atmosphere of the game. And when you were saying about getting the parts for the bus, I literally had the imagery of this post-apocalyptic scenario, the whole broken buses all over the place, and not sort of like a really prestige setting like some of my M-Space campaigns would be. So I really like that. One of the things I found about going into M-Space, and I'm interested what your thoughts about it, is that as a new GM, if somebody wanted to run this Rubble and Ruin, is there a lot of setup, or can you sort of like introduce things a bit at a time? How do you suggest people who want to run the campaign go about it?
So I've tried my best to make it as easy as possible. To that end, I've got a little booklet called Chicago Ruins.
Yeah.
It's available for free as a PDF download on Drive-Through.
Drive-Through, yeah.
And the idea here is it sets up a setting and gives it kind of, I've got this Chicago city, the US city of Chicago in ruins, and here are the groups around it. And in the back, there's a couple of pages of making characters in this setting.
Yeah.
Character sheet in there. And that's for free. So, the GM, of course, going to have to get a copy of the book, the core books, but at least all the players don't. And they can have that, and all the tables, hopefully all the tables that are needed are in the back of that. So everybody has those when you're sitting down to play. Then for the GM there, I wrote a little module into the ruins, into the rubble. Sorry. Into the rubble. And that provides 2 dungeon crawls, except I call them rubble crawls. So it's, here's a hole full of monster. It's the first one, there's a partially collapsed in the rubble underneath the L, which is the elevated trains that run through Chicago. Some of the rubble didn't collapse underneath it, and there's some cavities back there. And a group of prospectors go in to explore it, and everything's statted out, and it gives you an idea of how to run the classic rubble crawl. And then there's a second one where it's just, here's a piece of rubbled area that your characters are going to go in and explore. And you could just run those as written. You could certainly move them to, grab the pieces that you like and run those. I have another piece that I'm working on, which will be the Free City of Carbondale, which is a more developed, it's an area that's not in total rubble, and it's to represent sort of in a fantasy setting where people start in the little kingdom, and everything's nice here. And then you go out, oh, we need the thing, and we're going to go to get the MacGuffin on a quest. That's almost done. It's in layout.
Right.
So, but experienced GMs can mix and match and, take what you like, and, oh, it's nice to have some stats for monsters, but I'm doing this over here, and away you go.
Yeah. And I really did think, I think that Free, I think it is the Chicago Ruins thing, really is, I think would be, it's really nice for players to have that, because like you say, there's so much information in there that they will use. Right there, I think there's some equipment, some stats for firearms, and I think there's all the specials in there that they can use. So I think it's fantastic that there's that option for them as well. And I love adventures, and sometimes I just read modules, and I must admit I loved Into the Rubble. And I really did. And it took me back to my Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition days with these dungeon adventures, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Go for it.
And that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Yeah. And what the reason I'm writing the Free City of Carbondale is that it occurred to me. So I know that when I see one of these old school Renaissance, this is a dungeon crawl, but I don't have to do dungeons games. Yeah. I know that I can just, I'll start in a little city over here, and we'll have a court intrigue adventure, or we'll have some other, kind of adventure.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, I want to make it as easy as possible for people who may not get. You don't have to do just as in, in fantasy games, you don't have to do dungeon crawls. In Rubble and Ruin, you don't have to do rubble crawls. I just started there because you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good place to start with any new game, because it allows the players and the GM to engage with combat, which I think is always an essential of any of these games, but also a bit of skills as well. There's some skills that you can use, but also to set that feel of the setting, and I think when I was reading Into the Rubble, I really got a feel of the atmosphere and the setting. And I think that really, if anybody's thinking about, running this, then I really would recommend that, because once you've read it, you get a complete feel of the rule set and the setting and how players are going to interact with each other. This is rather new. When was it first published, Rubble and Ruin?
Well, the Mythras version came out just recently, June. I think I went through, I went back and looked at the beginning of the pandemic. I went back and looked at some gaming writing I had done earlier, and I'm like, well, this isn't bad. I'm as a scientist, I write a lot, but I write very dry things. I'm like, well, this isn't horrible, And then I got thinking, the world needs some more options to explore science and technology right now.
I totally agree.
As the pandemic's unfolding. And so I've spent my pandemic free time bringing this up and getting into a Mythras, a pure Mythras setting, so that then I can get the license and publish it. So it's only been out a couple of months.
Yeah, because I noticed that the publishing date was 2021, So this is fresh off the press. Yeah, so it'd be fantastic for people to nip along. I think it's all available on drive-through, isn't it?
Exclusively. Yeah.
So people can go over there, and Aftermath is on there as well. But I think this Rubble and Ruin is fantastic, and it's a well-produced PDF as well. I was really impressed with the maps. Did you say that you've done some map creation?
So I do, yeah. So in the intervening, somehow I started back in the basic role-playing days, BRP. Yeah. There would do these adventure contests, and they weren't really contests. It's just, write some adventures for BRP and we'll publish them. And I would do those, and that was fun. And I started doing maps, and I've always really loved fantasy cartography. Yeah. And so anyway, long story, slightly less long, I got into doing maps for publications. And so I've done things for 60 Stone. I did, where is that? For a lot of Call of Cthulhu stuff.
Fantastic.
The Dare just came out recently by Kevin Ross. Did the Dare it's published with Chaosium. And I did the maps there, and I for a bunch of other people, sort of small press stuff. I would do the maps. I was getting decent. I have a very kind of old school style.
Yeah. It's very nice.
Well, thank you. And so I tend to think and work in maps.
Yeah.
So when I'm gaming, forever, when I run a game, I like to run sandbox games. So there's less of in my story, there's always some narrative that's coming out, but it's here's a map, here are the factions, and I know what's happening, you don't. And you, as the players, interact with this evolving world. And that's the kind of play that I like to run. You can do that in Rubble and Ruin. You can also do any other, any other style. But I've always had these maps. So I'm glad you enjoyed the maps.
It's something I have yet to find my niche in. I love GMing. I really do, that acting and everything, but I'm absolutely hopeless at producing anything creative, so I'm more than happy to let somebody else make the maps and just give them to me.
And I am not offended if you download Chicago Ruins, grab the maps, and go play some other game on them.
To be honest with you, Rich, I thought for a free product, because I'm right in saying that, aren't I? Chicago Ruins.
The PDF is free. I have to charge for the printed book because they charge me. I think I make 35 cents on a printed book.
The quality of those maps are brilliant. I have to say, I was very, very impressed by them. So what's in the pipeline for Rubble and Ruin?
The one thing I'm working on now is, I mentioned the Carbondale. Carbondale's a university town in downstate Illinois. So Chicago is about 300 miles, 400 odd kilometers north of Carbondale, and in the real world. And it's a kind of a fascinating little place. And in the canonical Rubble and Ruin, it was spared the worst of the global wars. And so there's still some little city states down there. Nice. in conflict, and these city states kind of tie into larger movements off to the east and west and south, and this little town Carbondale, I kind of think of it as Casablanca from the movie Casablanca, yeah. Where it's, the Nazis are coming, but they're not here. And it's, yeah. Kind of it's in this balance between all these different forces. And it makes a nice setting to drop in another play style where it's not rubble crawls, but rather
fantastic
intrigue and things like that.
That's absolutely brilliant. When's that due to be out? Do you know?
Soon, very soon. Top people are on this. Top people. So all of Rubble and Ruin is just my own. It's me.
Yeah.
I have some help with like proofreading and a lot of canned art. Some very fine stock art but. So it's mostly written. All the maps are done. The maps are, for me, as you've noticed, that's where I start. I'm very happy with the maps because I'm going to just do it as a PDF. It's color maps. So those are all done. Layout. So, look for it in 2021.
Yeah. Fantastic.
But
yeah, well, thank you so much for coming along and talking on the podcast. I really do appreciate giving the time to come and share this fantastic supplement, or this. Well, it's really a rule set in itself, which is based on that Mythras imperative, which is fantastic. So, thank you so much. And I, for one, I am definitely going to try to run a Rubble and Ruin campaign sometime. I tell you.
Well, I thank you very much for the opportunity. Of course, it's been a thrill for me. And, I look forward to talking to you in the future.
I learned so much during the chat, and I was so intrigued about how much of Rich's knowledge and understanding of genes and mutations had informed the creation of the game. As mentioned, all the publications are available on the drive-thru website for purchase and download. I'm definitely looking for an opportunity to engage with this in the future, maybe within the M-Space campaign. The party will arrive at a Rubble and Ruin base planet. That would be so cool, although they do need to get a starship first. Thanks to Rich for coming onto the podcast and talking about his products. I was completely inspired to produce a Rubble and Ruins campaign, and I hope you were too. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. I really appreciate your support, and do check out the Tapper Talk forums. There are some great people there sharing their ideas within the discussions. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in October. Until then, I hope that all your opposed roles succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.